He didn't need to shout. Just one look and the entire room fell silent. The white suit, the long hair, the voice that cut through the air like a blade at one's throat. On screen, he was Youngblood Priest, a cocaine dealer who dared to defy the police society, and even Hollywood itself. In real life, he was Ron O'Neal, the man who turned criminal into a symbol and danger into art. Superfly cost only $500,000 to make, yet it stunned America. Black audiences applauded with pride. The media fumed in fear. One actor, one role, one era shaken to its core. From the poverty of Cleveland to the dazzling lights of Los Angeles, Ron O'Neal emerged as a challenge. He didn't just play danger, he was the threat to every stereotype Hollywood had ever built. And then, what made people say Ron O'Neal was the most dangerous actor? From the child on the streets of Cleveland. Before Ron O'Neal became the most dangerous man in Hollywood, he was just a skinny black boy living in a rundown house on a poor street in Cleveland, Ohio. No lights, no audience. Only the screech of streetcars passing through the smoke-filled streets and the metallic scent of rust from the factories. It was 1937. America was still mired in the Great Depression, and for people of color, the dream of equality felt as distant as a promise never kept. Yet amid all that harshness, there was a boy learning to observe the world through extraordinary eyes that Hollywood would never forget. Ron was born in Utica, New York, but grew up in Cleveland, where waves of laborers arrived each day, hoping to change their fate. His father, Ernest O'Neal, had once been a gifted jazz musician, a clarinet and saxophone player who performed on stage in the 1920s. But that musical dream had died young under the cruel reality of a segregated America. Ernest laid down his instruments along with his pride and went to work in a factory. His mother Eunice, a quiet, diligent woman, worked in a hospital caring for others while feeding a family of 6. They had 3 daughters and 3 sons. Ron was the middle child, often forgotten at mealtime when all that was left were beans and stale bread. But within that house was an unspoken lesson: survival is an art. Ernest never told his children he had once been a musician. He hid his old instruments in the attic as if burying his past. Only after his father's death did Ron stumble upon them. When he touched the dust-covered saxophone, his heart trembled. A man had once dreamed and had to abandon it to survive. Ron was 16 then. 6 months later, his older brother died in a truck accident. 2 deaths in a row carved a scar that never healed in the boy's soul. From that moment on, Ron O'Neal swore he would never die in a factory like his father, never live a life someone else had written for him. He graduated from Glenville High School, a public school where most students were children of laborers. Ron wasn't an outstanding student. He preferred watching people to solving math problems. Friends said his eyes spoke sometimes so intensely that it made others uncomfortable, as if he could see right through them. That gaze would later become his greatest weapon on screen. After graduation, Ron enrolled at Ohio State University, but after just 1 semester, he dropped out. Poor grades, disillusionment, and the feeling he was on the wrong path. By 20, Ron had endured more than most young men should: poverty, death, and the helplessness of being black in a white world. Yet those years sharpened him into a storyteller, with a soul, someone who understood that tragedy wasn't meant to be mourned, but performed. He once said in an interview, "I saw my father die because he couldn't live truthfully. I don't intend to." The New York Dream. After leaving Ohio State University in confusion about his future, Ron O'Neal stood at what seemed like a dull crossroads, taking a labor job in a factory just like his father once did. But one afternoon in 1957 changed everything. A friend invited Ron to see the musical Finian's Rainbow at Karamu House, the oldest black community theater in Cleveland. For the first time in his life, Ron saw people who looked like him on stage, singing, acting, and living every moment to the fullest. "I was stunned," he later recalled, "as if someone had flung open a door to a world I never knew existed." Right after that performance, Ron decided to join the Karamu House troupe, beginning a grueling artistic journey. From 1957 to 1964, he trained tirelessly, honing his acting skills and taking on every kind of role, from Walter Lee in A Raisin in the Sun and Stanley Kowalski in A Streetcar Named Desire to lighter parts in comedies and musicals like Kiss Me, Kate. By day, he painted houses to make a living. By night, he read scripts and rehearsed until his voice went hoarse. "Karamu House was my school," he said, "except here I didn't have to pay tuition." It was a time that shaped both his craft and his soul, a place where Ron learned to read human emotion to feel the pain and hope hidden within every character. In 1964, ambition carried him from Cleveland to New York, the beating heart of American art. He rented a small room in Harlem, teaching acting classes for the Harlem Youth Arts Program, while wandering between off-Broadway theaters in search of a break. But the new path was not easy. Hollywood and the New York stage were still steeped in racial prejudice. Ron's light skin and long straight hair made him too different from the narrow image of a black actor. He was rejected at the audition for Ceremonies in Dark Old Men the moment he walked in. The next day, he returned wearing an afro wig, and the director's attitude flipped. "Yeah, you look better now." That story became a small legend about his adaptability and resilience, the man who understood that in this business, sometimes you have to act before you even step on stage. Through countless rejections, Ron never gave up. In 1970, he was invited to join a small unpaid project, No Place to Be Somebody, written by Charles Gordon, and produced at Joseph Papp's Public Theater. Many advised him to take a paying role instead, but Ron said, "I choose what scares me, because only then do I know I'm alive." That decision changed everything. The play, centered on conflict, dignity, and power within the black community, became a phenomenon. No Place to Be Somebody not only won the Pulitzer Prize, the first ever for a play by a black writer, but also earned Ron the Obie Award and Drama Desk Award for his extraordinary performance. His portrayal of a scheming bar owner and pimp left audiences torn between hatred and admiration, while critics hailed him as the year's biggest stage discovery. This triumph lifted Ron O'Neal out of obscurity. After nearly a decade of struggle and poverty, he finally earned a place in New York's artistic world. But just as the spotlight found him on stage, another opportunity appeared, this time from the silver screen. In 1971, he began landing small roles in films like Move and The Organization. Yet those were only preludes. One day, Ron received a call from Philip Fenty, an old friend from Cleveland who had become a screenwriter. Fenty and director Gordon Parks Jr. were preparing a low-budget independent film about a cocaine dealer in Harlem, an anti-hero unlike anything Hollywood had ever seen. Fenty said simply, "I need someone with both brains and fire, someone audiences will trust and fear at the same time." Ron O'Neal agreed, not realizing that the modest $500,000 project would become one of the most explosive films of the 1970s Superfly. It was a defining moment. After 15 years of grinding on the stage from a house painter to an artist, Ron O'Neal was about to step into cinema with the role that would make him a legend, Youngblood Priest, the man who turned danger into an icon. And from there, the story of the most dangerous actor in Hollywood, the man in the white suit, who made Hollywood tremble. In the early 1970s, America was in the midst of a storm of social change: the Black Power movement, anti-war protests, racial inequality, and a rising generation of black artists seeking their own voice. Within that context, Hollywood gave birth to a new genre: blaxploitation, low-budget films reflecting life on the streets, where black people were no longer side characters or victims, but leaders, powerful, dangerous, seductive, and self-determined. The massive success of Shaft 1971 proved that audiences wanted to see black heroes beat the man, a symbol of white power. And just 1 year later, in 1972, a modest independent film was born. Made with only about $500,000, shot guerrilla style in Harlem, without permits, stealing electricity from lampposts to light the set, that film was Superfly. Director Gordon Parks Jr., son of legendary photographer Gordon Parks, wanted to tell the truest story of Harlem, a world blending despair, funk music, and the dream of freedom. Screenwriter Philip Fenty, Ron O'Neal's old friend, wrote a script built around a man who was both commanding and tormented. He knew only Ron could embody that duality. Thus, Youngblood Priest was born, the man who made Hollywood both fascinated and afraid. Priest was a successful cocaine dealer living in a lavish apartment filled with leather chairs, chandeliers, and snow-white suits. He drove a Cadillac Eldorado with a Rolls-Royce grill, wore fur coats and wide-brimmed hats, and walked with effortless confidence tinged with arrogance. Yet beneath the flash was a weary soul. Priest despised the drug trade and wanted to make one last big deal for $500,000 so he could disappear in peace. He wasn't seeking heroism, only escape from the invisible chains society placed on poor black men in the city. Ron O'Neal understood the character to his core. He didn't just act, he lived as Priest. With shoulder-length hair, a cold stare, and a razor-thin smile, Ron created an anti-hero unlike anything cinema had seen before. Dangerous, magnetic, intelligent, and profound. Audiences couldn't look away when he was on screen. Priest didn't need to shout or fight. A single look could silence an entire room. But what truly made Priest iconic was his dialogue. Ron delivered lines that cut like blades, sharp, witty, and revealing. When a young black activist urged him to join the revolution against white people, Priest glared and replied, "I'll be ready to go out and kill white folks. But until you actually pick up a gun and start the revolution, go sing your protest songs somewhere else." A short, biting answer, but one that exposed a society full of hypocrisy where ideals and action never met. Priest didn't believe in the revolution. He believed only in his own freedom. The climax came at the end when a corrupt police officer cornered him and threatened his life. Priest smiled, raised his gun, and said, "You don't own me, pig, and no dog tells me when I can split." He then revealed he had hired a hitman to kill the officer's family if he died. The audience erupted. For the first time in Hollywood history, a black man faced the symbol of white authority and won, not with tears or apologies, but with intelligence, boldness, and danger. Superfly became an earthquake. With no big studio backing or advertising, only word of mouth, it spread like wildfire. Within weeks, it grossed over $5 million, 10 times its budget. In urban theaters, black audiences lined up around the block. For the first time, as Encyclopedia.com recorded, they saw someone who looked like them not kneeling, but standing tall, dressed sharp, living on his own terms. Meanwhile, Curtis Mayfield's soundtrack album, featuring hits like Freddy's Dead and Superfly, sold over 2 million copies, becoming one of the most legendary soundtracks ever. The image of Priest instantly entered pop culture, his fashion hairstyle, and effortlessly cool confidence. Overnight, Ron O'Neal became the brightest star of the blaxploitation era, known to fans simply by his character's name. He became a street icon not for violence, but for the dangerous freedom he radiated. Yet every spotlight casts a shadow. In 1973, Ron tried to recreate the magic by writing, directing, and starring in Superfly TNT. This time, Priest traveled to Africa to fight for liberation. But audiences no longer cared. The film flopped both critically and commercially. The Guardian wrote Ron O'Neal wanted to make Priest a political hero, but audiences only wanted him to stay dangerous. After that fall, Hollywood began to typecast Ron. Directors offered only roles as drug dealers, pimps, or gang bosses. "Superfly pulled me out of obscurity," Ron said bitterly, "but then it trapped me in my own shadow." In real life, people called him a real-life dope dealer, though he was only an actor. Still, Ron refused to surrender. He continued working in action films: The Master Gunfighter 1975, Brothers 1977, The Hitter 1979, and the martial arts film A Force of One 1979 with Chuck Norris. In 1984, he surprised audiences as a Cuban colonel in Red Dawn, one of the few blockbuster war films where Hollywood cast a black actor as the main villain. The role proved Ron still had power. He could terrify audiences with just his eyes and calm intensity, no dialogue needed. Unable to find his place in Hollywood, Ron returned to the stage where he truly belonged. He performed Shakespeare, playing Othello, Macbeth, and Petruchio, earning standing ovations from both black and white audiences. On stage, he was no longer Priest. He was a true artist. Throughout the 1980s, he appeared regularly on television in Freedom Road alongside Muhammad Ali, The Equalizer 1985-1989, and the sitcom A Different World 1990-1992. He maintained his gentlemanly aura, a cultured, self-possessed black man of intellect and grace. In 1996, while starring in Original Gangstas, a film reuniting blaxploitation legends, Pam Grier, Jim Brown, and Fred Williamson Ron called it a reunion of a generation that once dreamed of freedom. Though the movie wasn't a hit, he saw it as a fitting farewell to his golden era. In the end, he withdrew from the screen, leaving behind the enduring image of a man in a white suit walking through Harlem, dangerous yet solitary. The actor who made Hollywood admits some men don't just play legends. When the spotlight fades, the darkness remains. The success of Superfly made Ron O'Neal a star overnight, but that light burned too bright enough to scorch the rest of his life. Behind the calm elegance and those knife-sharp eyes, Ron was a deeply lonely man. In a 1980 interview, he once said Hollywood gave me a smile and a chair, then pulled the chair away the moment I sat down. After 1972, when Priest became an icon, Ron O'Neal faced a quiet tragedy. He was abandoned by Hollywood itself. Studios loved the image of the cool cocaine dealer, but didn't believe he could play a father, a teacher, or a politician. Ron recalled that among the hundreds of scripts sent to him, most revolved around guns, drugs, and women. I knew what they wanted, another Priest, but I'd already done that, and I had no intention of repeating myself. Refusing stereotyped roles meant losing income. For years, Ron returned to small theater stages in Los Angeles to survive. By day, he taught acting classes. By night, he directed or wrote experimental plays. To his students, he was intimidatingly strict. He forbade anyone from performing without truly feeling the emotion. He taught us that even anger has its own rhythm, a former student recalled. But others said Ron carried an unmistakable sadness, the look of someone who had once stood on the mountaintop and been thrown back down to the cold ground. Friends described Ron O'Neal as a perfectionist to the extreme. He would spend hours reworking a single line or argue fiercely about lighting angles. One colleague recalled a day when Ron stormed off set after a director asked him to act like Priest again. He refused to live off his past, the colleague said, but the tragedy was that the past refused to let him go. As his career slowed, Ron faced serious financial troubles. For years, he lived without health insurance quietly in a small Los Angeles apartment, keeping only a few Superfly posters and an old guitar. He never spoke publicly about his romantic life, though rumors suggested a relationship with a stage actress in the late 1970s that ended due to lifestyle differences. Ron loved the craft more than himself, a close friend said. That's why he couldn't keep anyone for long. Another shadow followed him: his health. In the late 1990s, he began losing weight rapidly, but hid his illness from friends. Only when he entered treatment for pancreatic cancer in 2000 did people learn he had been fighting it silently for years. Still, Ron managed to complete his final project, the film On the Edge 2002, with rapper Ice-T. When filming wrapped, he quietly told a co-star, "I don't know if I'll ever act again, but if this is the last time, I lived it right." Beyond illness, Ron also endured lasting misunderstanding from the public. Although Superfly was groundbreaking, many black critics and civil rights organizations condemned the film for romanticizing drug dealers. They claimed it glorified materialism and misled young black audiences. Ron responded fiercely, "If they see Priest as a hero, that's their problem, not mine. I just showed the truth, a man trying to crawl out of the mud any way he could." Yet despite his defense, part of the community turned against him. At one independent film screening in Chicago, a middle-aged man approached and said, "You're the reason my son's in jail." Ron said nothing, just nodded and walked away. Amid praise and criticism, he kept his artistic dignity. No scandals, no addictions, no sexual controversies. Ron O'Neal was nothing like the stereotypes Hollywood tried to impose on black heroes. But his solitude was real. After 1998, he became nearly reclusive, appearing only occasionally at retrospectives honoring the blaxploitation era. At a 2001 reunion, when asked how it felt to look back on his career, he replied, "I used to be dangerous not because of guns, but because I wasn't afraid to say what I thought. That's the one sin Hollywood never forgives." Ron O'Neal passed away in 2004 at the age of 66. No headlines, no grand funeral, only a few close friends and former students came to say goodbye. The Los Angeles Times wrote Ron O'Neal departed quietly, the way he lived proud and without needing anyone's pity. The tragedy of Ron O'Neal was not his decline, but that he was ahead of his time. When Hollywood was still unready for complex, intelligent, multi-layered black characters, he became one. Priest was never just a drug dealer. He was a metaphor for the black man trapped between the American dream and a cruel reality. And Ron O'Neal, who brought that figure to life with all his strength and pain, was a man who lived and died for the art he believed in. The spotlight has faded, but the darkness remains. In it still lingers the image of a man in a white suit walking through Harlem, a faint smile on his lips, as if he knew the world would never be brave enough to truly The shadow that never dies. When Ron O'Neal passed away in 2004, many believed his name would fade along with the blaxploitation wave that once stormed through the 1970s. But the opposite happened. The image of Priest, that he created lives on haunting popular memory as a figure both dangerous, beautiful, and tragic. Today, whenever Hollywood speaks of the black anti-hero, it always circles back to Ron O'Neal. Before him, black characters were rarely allowed to be both seductive and flawed. They were either righteous heroes or despised villains. But Priest was different. He was both victim and controller. That duality made the character resonating deeply with the psychology of urban America at the time. Critic Armand White once wrote, "If Shaft represents the victory of blackness, then Priest represents the doubt about that victory." Ron was more than an actor. He redefined what it meant to be a black man on screen. Before him, Hollywood was comfortable with the images of the cheerful servant, the vicious criminal, or the noble warrior. Ron shattered all of them. He brought to life a man of depth and intellect with a hunger for freedom and the courage to step into darkness to claim it. Many later film scholars have argued that Superfly laid the foundation for the complex archetypes later embodied by Denzel Washington and Samuel L. Jackson, men who are both fearsome and sympathetic, powerful, yet fragile. Ron O'Neal's legacy also permeates popular culture. From rap music to street fashion, the image of Priest fur coat, wide-brimmed hat, customized Cadillac became an aesthetic icon. Rappers like Snoop Dogg, 50 Cent, and Jay-Z all acknowledged Superfly as a defining influence, calling it the Bible of pimp culture, a style that celebrated power, confidence, and defiance of the system. In The Blueprint 2, Jay-Z rapped "Superfly the way I move Ron O'Neal cool," a direct tribute to the man who set the gold standard for coolness across generations. To the black artistic community, Ron O'Neal remains proof of personal integrity and courage. He refused to accept typecast roles, avoided the easy path, and chose exile over compromise. Director Spike Lee once said, "If it weren't for people like Ron, we wouldn't be here today." Filmmakers like Lee John Singleton and Antoine Fuqua have all cited him as a fearless symbol of artistry against Hollywood's complacency and prejudice. After his death, numerous art magazines revisited Ron's life as a case study in the tragedy of talented black artists in Hollywood, celebrated for one role, then imprisoned by it. Yet within that same narrative lies a quiet acknowledgement he opened doors. Today, when we see Denzel Washington's morally complex cop in Training Day Michael B., Jordan's conflicted warrior in Black Panther, or Idris Elba's haunted detective in Luther, we can still glimpse the shadow of Priest, a man neither wholly good nor evil, but one who dares to face the truth. Remarkably, though long forgotten through the 1990s, Ron O'Neal's name has since reemerged in film scholarship. Universities such as NYU and Howard have included Superfly in their curricula on black cinema history. Some critics now regard it as a pioneering work of American urban realism, a film that captured Harlem's struggle with honesty, neither romanticized nor condemned. From a sociological lens, Priest represents a generation of black youth trapped between the American dream and generational poverty, striving to rise while every door remained locked. Beyond cinema, Ron O'Neal's impact endures in arts education. Many of his former students from the Harlem Youth Arts Program went on to become playwrights, directors, and Broadway actors. They still speak of him with reverence. "Ron taught us never to fear failure." He said the real danger is when an artist stops trying. Like his character, Ron departed in solitude, but left an echo that refuses to fade. 2 decades after his death, whenever Curtis Mayfield's Superfly soundtrack drifts through a Harlem bar or a documentary about black culture, his name resurfaces, sometimes with a sigh, sometimes with admiration. Because Ron O'Neal was more than an actor. He was a symbol of courage, of the price one pays to stay true to oneself. He didn't live to be adored. He lived to be understood. And for many, that's precisely what made him dangerous, not for the roles he played, but because he dared to expose the truest parts of humanity in a world that prefers illusion. If you found this story captivating, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you won't miss the next hidden truths about the people who once made Hollywood tremble. Because behind every spotlight, there's always a price, and we're here to tell you about it. Like a strange prophecy during a 1973 interview when asked how he wanted to be remembered, Ron simply smiled and said, "I want them to remember that I did everything with my heart. That for once I made the world look straight at us black people, not through pity or fear, but through respect. And perhaps that is why more than half a century later people still speak of him as the most dangerous man in Hollywood. Not because he carried a gun, but because he carried a truth that an entire industry once tried to forget.
All data, analysis, and commentary in this video are presented based on information available at the time of production. The content is subject to change over time and should not be considered a definitive forecast.
There is still so much more to explore: stories of resilience, legacy, and truth. Feel free to dive into some of our top recommended videos now appearing on your screen.